الرحمن الرحيم إذا وقعت الواقعة ليس لوقعتها كاذبة خافضة رافعة إذا رجت الأرض رجا وبست الجبال بسا فكانت هباء منبثا وكنتم أزواجا ثلاثة فأصحاب الميمنة ما أصحاب الميمنة وأصحاب المشأمة ما أصحاب المشأمة والسابقون السابقون أولئك المقربون في جنات النعيم ثلة من الأولين ثلة من الأولين وقليل من الآخرين على سرر موضونة متكئين عليها متقابلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. It's my great privilege and honor to welcome you all at this international webinar at the Institute of Policy Studies, Islamabad, on the topic of Indian past, present, and future, and the perceptions of the Muslim world about it. It's a great privilege because this subject has become of increasing regional, local, and global significance and has drawn interest from around the world. So IPS, which is a leading independent think tank of Pakistan, which has devoted and contributed on this subject for over 4 decades now, has taken this initiative to invite some of its friends and leading scholars and political leaders from around the world to bring together the perspectives that how does the Muslim world view India? How does the Muslim world view Indian past, present, and future? Is it an opportunity? Is it a challenge? Is it a threat? India, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very elaborate and illustrious panel to discuss various dimensions and aspects of Indian reality, which we will try to deconstruct and then reconstruct for the benefit of our viewers around the world. If we look at India in 4 dimensions, firstly, at the local level, Indian ideology, Indian domestic politics, and Indian society is undergoing remarkable transformation, which has raised concerns for the minorities inside India, in its immediate neighborhood and the region, and also around the world. So what does this Indian ideology, politics, and society mean for the rest of the world? And the second aspect is the regional approach of India, or the regional behavior of India towards its neighbors. Is India behaving as a responsible, mature, peace-loving nation in this region? Or is it causing concern and deficit of trust and insecurity in its numerous neighbors? How do these countries view India and its behavior? And how is that behavior reflected in Indian foreign policy as well as Indian regional policy? The third level is basically its security paradigm or its security approach towards its region. What is Indian defense and strategic posture towards the region? Is it pivoted towards Pakistan or is it shifting towards China? And how do these countries and also the other neighboring countries like Bangladesh, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh view Indian strategic behavior? And the fourth aspect is the global level, which is the worldview. What is Indian worldview? How does India view itself? What is its self-image? And how does it want the world to view itself? As a land of opportunity or a factor of instability or a cause of concern? Is it a strategic ally of the status quo powers or a challenge or a threat to the status quo and the contemporary world order? These are some of the very interesting, relevant, and important questions in the contemporary academic, policy, and political circles, for which we have assembled together some of the most illustrious and leading experts from around the world. We have people from Britain, we have people from Turkey, we have experts from Egypt, we have representation from Qatar, and we will, last but not the least, have a keynote address from the Federal Minister of Human Rights, Dr. Shireen Mazari. But I would invite the comments and questions from all those who are joining us today in this webinar through Facebook page of Institute of Policy Studies as well as YouTube. So feel free to share your questions and comments and join us in this rich and interesting debate and making it more useful and interesting for all of us. So let me see who have we so far with us. I think we should start with the Right Honorable Lord Nazir Ahmed. I see him. Lord Saab, can you hear me? Can you please unmute yourself?
Unmute myself now. Can you hear me now?
Absolutely, loud and clear, Lordship. Really a great privilege to have you here. Thank you for sparing time. Allow me a brief introduction for the benefit of our viewers from around the world. Right Honorable Lord Nazir is one of the leading Muslim members of the House of Lords, which he joined 22 years ago. He has been considered as one of the 500 influential Muslims around the world for 5 years. He has served as for 10 years as a counselor before joining the House of Lords. He's from Azad Kashmir, but he has campaigned very vociferously and with a lot of commitment and passion for the rights of the Kashmiris at the British House of Lords and around the world. So it's my great honor and privilege to invite Lordship Lord Nazir Ahmed to share his views on the Indian past, present, and future. What is your perspective towards how India is behaving, how it has behaved, and does it represent a land of opportunity or a cause of concern for the international community, Lordship? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for providing me this opportunity to speak about my favorite topic, because I think people around the world has always misunderstood India, because they always believe that India has, unfortunately, two faces. One for international community, which it likes to show as the largest democracy in the world, and also a land for opportunity for everyone, equality for everyone, a liberal, a kind of a democracy that provides equality for everyone. But we, the Kashmiris, know the way they have treated Muslims in the past and the way they are treating Muslims right now. So the RSS, which is now in coalition in government with the BJP, they've now shown their true colors to the world community, international community. But the very fact that Gandhiji was assassinated by RSS. The RSS has always been there. So those people who conducted a massacre in Gujarat, and those who have been targeting the Dalits and the Muslims and the Sikhs and the Christians everywhere around in India, they've always been there. So looking at the past, people have never really understood. People really didn't care because there was Cold War. India took on the side of Soviet Union, and the West and Pakistan were on the side of NATO. And everybody thought India is a very poor country where people, millions, hundreds of millions of people who slept on the footpaths. They grew up on footpaths. They lived on footpaths, and there was a growing middle class in India, which gave opportunity for the rest of the world for business. And unfortunately, after Soviet Union's breakup, there was an opportunity for the international community really to engage with India, where they found economic opportunity, because there was a big market, huge, over 1 billion people, and everyone wanted to ignore the Hindutva, the RSS, the extreme philosophy. Let me just sort of compare this. As a Muslim, people always taunted us with ISIS and the extremist so-called Muslims. We all detested ISIS, and we also detested any extremist, terrorist, so-called Muslim. But the very fact that this Hindutva philosophy, these RSS people are elected in government, they are in coalition with BJP, they are the ones who are ruling India. So when you saw the election of BJP and Mr. Modi, you saw that not only there was intimidation of the intellectuals, the liberal elite, those people who believed in equal India with opportunities, etc. They had ink thrown on their faces. They had people slap them in their offices. In public, all videoed, all shown around, just to intimidate those who raise their voices against these extremists. And so what happened now is that the Indian media is silenced. The courts, I believe, now I know people don't like talking about courts. Courts are subservient to RSS BJP government. So you see all their judgment. They're very politicized. They're very much under control from the BJP, RSS, even Shiv Sena, who have very much control on these institutions. So when you see attacks on individual Muslims in Delhi or in other places around India, I will come to Kashmir in a minute, but the very fact that the world has remained silent, well, not quite so, because the Institute for Religious Freedom in the United States of America has very clearly said that India is no longer a secular country that provides opportunities to all religious communities. Actually, it sort of talks about this rise of extremism. The European Parliament has produced a wonderful report which highlights and focuses on some of these atrocities being committed against minorities. So whether it is the Dalits, whether it is the Muslims, whether it is other religious minorities, they have been victims of this rise of Hindu fascism, the RSS fascism. So in terms of Kashmir, we know what happened on 5th of August, but even before that, here, Mr. Chairman, let me just remind everyone, people honestly do not understand this RSS and BJP government, because they show the Muslim world how good they are. They will remind you that there are over 100 million Muslims in India. Ask BJP how many Muslim MPs are represented in parliament from their political party, and there's one. How many are in the sort of decision-making structures of this political party? Hardly any. So, you know, this actually shows when Modi speaks about India and the religious minorities, he talks about the Buddhists, he talks about the Sikhs, he talks about Christians, he does not mention Muslims. I honestly cannot understand how Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia, like UAE, like Iran, like Bahrain, who have provided him with the huge honor of awards when, you know, 2 years ago when he went around, or 18 months ago when he went around this Muslim world. So because there he gives the impression that there are 200 million Muslims and they're equal and they are living a very comfortable life. Actually, they're not. They are second-class citizens. And because of the CAA, very clearly, Bangladesh can tell you how many of their citizens who, ex-citizens who live in India are now second-class citizens, but Muslims. Only 2 days ago in UP, a video has just now appeared near Deoband, where a Muslim was beaten to death, lynched. But that's a regular thing. From Delhi to UP to Bengal to everywhere. It happens in Kashmir all the time because I don't know, Mr. Chairman, how much time I have, but I just want to do final comparison with the Zionist state of Israel, how they have driven out the Palestinians from West Bank, and the settlements are illegal settlements are coming in West Bank. The RSS BJP government is using the same policy in occupied Kashmir. Because what you see of these fake encounters, the so-called armed militants or armed youth who have been shot dead, they are actually they're creating these fake encounters so they can kill them, kill the youth. They've already got 15,000 youth after 5th of August locked up in around Indian jails. But they're killing them, then they're destroying their houses, putting the fear into the citizens, civilians' hearts and minds. And then they are going to bring in, because of the abrogation of 35A and 370, they have started to plan to bring in these RSS Hindutva extremists, just like the settlers in West Bank. It's the settlers in Kashmir, to change the demographics for whenever the right of self-determination is given. In any case, it's much easier for them to control Kashmiris than, at least that's what India believes. So as far as I am concerned, India has never been a land of opportunity. India is not at peace with its neighbors. Ask China, ask Nepal. Nepal's parliament, they've changed the constitution with unanimous vote in both parliaments, upper house and the lower house. Ask what happened in Sri Lanka, and ask Bangladesh. So you're absolutely right. With Pakistan, you see they have this a kind of thing about Pakistani pigeons and even drones made in India, which they cannot detect. They think that these locusts have been sent by Pakistan. Even cold wind has been sent by Pakistan to destroy their crop and also to attack India. So and this is what actually the illiterate Hindutva RSS fascist people believe, which Mr. Modi and his team would like them to believe. And sadly, it's a very dangerous thing because they have the nuclear weapons, they have all the technology, and those people who think, I'm so glad that people in the Middle East are now waking up. There are some wonderful young royals from the GCC countries who have been tweeting, and they have been exposing India and their current and the past policies. And I hope the rulers will also wake up. I want to say thank you to Turkey because Turkey has been supported, and Turkish media has been supporting, and actually Al Jazeera and Turkish media has been giving a very balanced reporting on the situation in Kashmir and also what is happening to the Muslims in India. So sadly, I don't have very good news because even when I knew that Muslims in India didn't want to talk against their own country, and I know that whenever I told them that RAW interfered in Pakistan, RAW bought people in Karachi, they caused all terrorism in Karachi. Now their own NQN's own people are now saying that they were there when Indian High Commission and RAW intelligence officers were providing funds and also logistic support for them to create terrorism in Pakistan. Sadly, one last word, because the Institute has been very, very good in producing excellent research for Pakistan. But sadly, in Pakistan, people didn't believe that India was involved in this type of terrorism in Pakistan, and they were funding and they were creating these problems for Pakistan. They created this narrative that Pakistan not only is sending terrorists across, so cross-border terrorism became a kind of a cliche for around the world. Pakistan sending terrorists, training terrorists, training camps, etc., which sadly took many, many years. Even some of the propaganda that Indians were creating, some of the Pakistan's politicians were repeating it in their speeches and apologizing for something which wasn't created by Pakistan. It wasn't Pakistanis. It was RAW that was funding and also creating this. So I think my time is probably up because I can hear some voices. And if I've gone on a little bit too long, my apologies, because I could go on much longer talking about RSS, Shiv Sena, and BJP and these fascist movements.
Thank you so much, Lordship. I think you've set a very bold and very candid tone on this very important subject. And I'm really grateful for your very comprehensive, candid, and insightful views on this subject. So without any further ado, I'll request and invite the second speaker, who is also a leading politician from United Kingdom, Mr. Khalid Mehmood, who's a member of parliament in Britain. He represents Labour Party and has been an MP from Birmingham for the last 19 years. He has also been a shadow Europe minister since 2016. It's my great honor to invite Mr. Khalid Mehmood, member of British Parliament, to share his views on this subject of Indian past, present, and future. And also, if Mr. Mehmood, you can briefly share your views that how does British policy and British politics look at India? That does the British politics and British policy view India as a matter of concern or an opportunity? Because there is a hope that the human rights realities inside India and Indian occupied Kashmir will have some attention and some interest by the British political leadership. So, Mr. Khalid Mehmood, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. I just want to say a great thank you to Lord Ahmed, who's been a great friend, and I suppose in a way a mentor as well, because he's slightly older than me, so I can say that perhaps my older brother as well. He came into Parliament before I did, so he's now the longest serving British parliamentarian probably in the history of any Muslim or Pakistani particularly, or Kashmiri descent. So I think we owe him that respect in relation to what he has done and what he's achieved. And I think it's people like that actually paved the way for us to come forward. Muhammad is another one as well. So both of these guys are the two guys that I really look up to, and all the work that they've done. I think the most important issue for me here is to look at what's gone on, what the question that you raised in terms of the economy, and what does the British government wants at the moment. The British government is very much looking at the moment post-Brexit. We came out of Brexit. We should be ending our union with the European Union, which at the end of December. We haven't got a signed agreement in any way to try and solidify that. That doesn't look like happening, and I think there'll be a big rush towards the end. What therefore that leads is that the British government will not be supporting mainly the Kashmiri issue because purely of the economy. We've tried to get so many questions to Prime Minister Boris Johnson on this issue, specifically on the human rights and civil liberties. And we're not doing anything in relation to that. We've not had a single answer from him. So I think in terms of India's economy and the economic position, I am not hopeful from the government to be getting this. What we can continue to try and do is we can try to force the issue, which we've done, all of us, all the parliamentarians have done for a long time, and we will continue to stand up for that. A lot of my new colleagues that have come through are very adamant about this, and all of us, both in the House of Lords and in the Commons, are united on this. That India has got to be exposed for its human rights and civil liberty abuses that continue daily, day in, day out. It is the 70th year of the Geneva Fourth Convention on Human Rights and Civil Liberties. You know, Kashmir has been in that state for more than just over 72 years, I think, right? And that doesn't apply to us. It doesn't apply to the Kashmiris. And that's what's really, I think, gets all of us, is that when we talk about human rights and civil liberties, when we can go around and have South Sudan and North Sudan, we can split up all sorts of different countries at the drop of a hat. This long-running dispute where literally hundreds of thousands of people have died, have been tortured to death, have been put in mass graves. Nothing is said. And I think that is the issue that we should be concentrating on. Lord Nazir covered the international issue quite well. And so therefore, what I'm going to try and do is look at how we can do that domestically. So my domestic issue in relation to this is what we do as Kashmiris, both in the UK and the Kashmiri movement in Kashmir, but also Pakistan, how it deals with it. First of all, I think we've got to be united on an agenda, what we want to do. Lord Nazir knows very well that we've got a huge amount of Kashmiri organizations in the UK, probably more than the number of Kashmiri households in sometimes I say this, but we're not united. If we are to be united, and I'm not asking for leadership for myself or for Lord Ahmed, for any of the parliamentarian, what we're saying is let's have a coordinated agenda that we can work on. If we do not have a coordinated agenda, we will not be able to achieve anything. And that is exactly what's happening at the moment. Different people are coming to the House of Commons. Different people are having all sorts of photographs with different members of parliament and doing all sorts of things. That does not achieve the cause of the Kashmiri people. The longer we sit here, the longer we have great meetings with 300, 400, 500 people, 600 people, and having our biryani and roast chickens, that doesn't help our people in Kashmir who've been tortured to death. The integrity of the Kashmiri people, the izzat and the dignity of the Kashmiri women, whether they're mothers, whether they're daughters, or whether they're wives, when that continues to be abrogated every single day by the Indian Armed Forces and no recourse to the Geneva Convention. When all of that is happening, when a husband goes out, doesn't know where he's coming back, a son doesn't know where he's coming back, whether they're going to be tortured, whether they're going to be beaten up, whether they come back in the same condition, or whether they come back at all and they're buried in mass graves. None of that is taken up. And it's for up to us to work with us. And I plead to everybody, but certainly in the United Kingdom and Europe and the US, is to work together on a single base agenda. I'm very happy to work with Lord Ahmed and with other parliamentarians to set up a base where we can work from, to be able to provide the guidance. We're happy to ask the questions. We're happy to work that. But we need members from the community to write to members of parliament. If a member of parliament in the UK gets about 10, 12 letters, they're thinking, what the hell's going on? And they will react to that. But we will not do that. I think in terms of both, in terms of what's going on in Kashmir, we also and Pakistan, we need detailed information, which we're not getting. So we can then rebut some of the issues that are coming through in parliament. So we need information is the best way to attack this. It's no good just playing on emotional heartstrings, which is right, we should. But the real issue is to cut through the substance, is provide real evidence. This lockdown since the 5th of August is horrendous. And nobody in the world is batting an eyelid. Why is that? Are Kashmiri lives so cheap? Is the dignity of the Kashmiris not worth a penny? That is what the problem is. That what we are doing is continuously making our own meetings with ourselves, not going out to the people that we need to reach to, not going out and actually dealing with the issues that we need to deal with. So I think part of the issue has to be to deal with that. India has just gone on as a substitute member for 2 years on the Security Council. How can we stop that? We can stop that by having cohesive campaigns in the West, in those parliaments, that we can have a saying in. We don't do that. United Nations, basically, as far as I'm concerned, is an organization that is not fit for purpose. It does not do anything. So I think continually pleading to the United Nations, we're not going to achieve anything. We know where the blocks are. We know what's going to happen. We know how that is dealt with. So I think if we are to have a campaign that deals with the issue of Kashmir, then what we need to do is to have direct campaigns in our parliaments across the West, particularly, and actually to be able to, and Australia, New Zealand as well, in those terms, and wherever they are. And I say just one thing to all of the Muslim countries when we talk about this. We need just one Muslim country from the OIC to take this issue to the international criminal courts. That can be done. But we haven't got a single country that is prepared to take the plight of the Kashmiris to the international criminal courts. And if we did that, the world would stand up and listen to that. So I think what we need to do is forget about lobbying all of the people who are not interested in Kashmir and speak to the people. And the only crime that the Kashmiris have in Kashmir, the Muslim Kashmiris have in Kashmir, is because they're Muslim. All the Muslims that have been killed in India at the moment, the only crime they've committed is to be Muslims. So I think the OIC and the Muslim organizations about time stood up and said that we will defend. The whole idea of organization of Islamic countries to do what? If it's not to protect those Muslims that have been persecuted. And that is the question that we've got to ask ourselves. I think rather than relying on other people to do something for us, we've got to act as a community on this issue and determined community action. We've got to get Muslim governments to take a serious issue and the OIC and to be able to deal with this. Otherwise, I don't want to spend another 70 years. Look at this issue of people's dignity not being given to them, people's civil rights not being given to them, their humanity taken away from them. That's what I don't want to happen. So that's what we've got to do. In my terms, we've been saying this for a long time. We need the community on side, but we also need the Islamic countries to stand with the Kashmiri people to be able to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khalid Mehmood Saab. But briefly, I believe you're short of time, you have to leave. But quickly, if you can comment on how do you look at the Indian behavior generally when you see the rise of Hindutva and extremism, in which not just the Muslims and Kashmiris, but Sikhs and other minorities are feeling threatened. And how does that figure in British politics? Give us an insight. And also when the Indians want to purchase weapons, which they use in conducting brutalities and atrocities against Kashmiris, are there some voices raised in the House of Westminster? Briefly, please, sir.
I think, you've got one of the biggest advocates, Lord Ahmed, sitting there. All of us, and particularly Lord Ahmed, never misses an opportunity to raise these issues. The issue here is that the violence against Sikhs and other minorities, Lord Ahmed probably done more than I have done, has done a huge amount of work coordinating with the Sikhs and looking at the issue of Kashmir to be able to deal with that. That I have a significant Kashmiri Sikh constituency in my area. We work together with them. They want to support the Kashmiri people. But the problem is, until we get a cohesive campaign against them, you speak about defense sales, there is nothing, because the government wants to do more deals, not less. Post-Brexit, this government will want to do more deals. Unless we can come up with concrete ways of dealing with that, which is giving us the strength from the communities that live here, the Kashmiri communities going to their MPs and getting them to support us in the resolutions and the way they want to put forward and move those and do a practical job on this rather than emotional rallies and those sort of stuff. We've had too many of them. Lord Nazir probably more than I have, but we have had much too more of them. And I think what we need to do is at that time we stop that and we went forward and to deal with the real issue and actually get that, the crux of it. India is economically too big to ignore. India has put itself in a certain position. But the human rights abuse across the whole of India is devastating. You talk about the Sikhs, you talk about in the South, you speak about all the communities, the Christian community. And that's one thing you would highlight, the amount of Christians that have been burnt out of their churches and killed and maimed as well. And so all those things are happening, yet they get away with it because of the size of their economy and the way the government structure operates. That's where we need the OIC countries to come in and united to start to look at, if nothing else, at least sanctions against India and look at the way we need to do that. That's what's going to happen in order to make them think. That's what we need to do.
Thank you so much, Khalid Saab. A very candid and I think a very honest perspective from you. Without mincing words, I really appreciate your taking the time, despite your pressing engagement, for joining us at a short notice. I really appreciate. We hope that we'll continue engagement in future. So our next speaker, let's move to a country which has shown remarkable resilience and ambition and perseverance in world politics, despite challenges. Turkey. Turkey is emerging as a country, as a nation, which is confident, which is also conscious of its rich and deep history, and perhaps wants to play an important role in the emerging world order. So we have two very illustrious and senior scholars from Turkey to give their view, because Turkey has been very sensitive about the issues of Muslims around the world. So the first request would be from Professor Dr. Halil Tokar. He is at Istanbul University, Turkey. He is currently the chair of Urdu and Literature. He has over 26 books. I was going through the list. It's mind-boggling. And for those of us and you who do not know, his PhD thesis was on Mirza Ghalib. So that's a great, joy to those who follow Urdu around the world, not just to South Asia, but the diaspora and those who follow Urdu around the world. That's very interesting. He has written extensively on Iqbal and Kashmir, and over 100 articles in Urdu. So he is a very close expert and closely watches the development in South Asia and the people who reside here. So my request is from Professor Dr. Halil Tokar to benefit us from his views on the important topic of how do you look at Indian past, present, and future from the days of the Mughals and then the British Raj, and now how does the Indians are behaving today to Muslims and Kashmiris. I'll be really grateful. So Dr. Professor Halil Tokar, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. Assalamu alaikum. First of all, my topic is rapid escalation of Hindu far right and status of minorities in India. And I'm very grateful to Muhammad Khalid Saab and to Institute of Political Studies for the opportunity to address on such an important topic, which became a very sensitive issue, not only for India, but also for the rest of the world. Today, from occupied Jammu and Kashmir to the east of India, to Assam, from Gujarat to Uttar Pradesh, shortly all India is becoming a very dangerous trap for the minorities living in its soil. And no one has the right to say that this is internal affairs of India and no intervention is acceptable. Because lives of millions of innocent people cannot be an internal affair of any country. This is a humanitarian issue and deals to all humanity. When we start to talk about the current situation occupied Jammu and Kashmir in general, and India in special, we have to read the problem from the viewpoint of Hindutva, the far-right Hindu nationalism, so that we could understand the seriousness of the current situation in the subcontinent. What is Hindutva? In simple words, Hindutva is a kind of ultra-far-right nationalism of Hindus which aims to make India a Hindu Rashtra, a country without non-Hindu elements, and beyond of that, to create a pure sacred Akhand Bharat, undivided greater India, under the supremacy power of Brahman caste, the upper class of Hindu religion. It is like a joke, however, unfortunately, this is not a joke, but Hindutva ideologists have rested their ideology on fantastic fundamentals. And as we see generally, all fascistic ideologies use hate as a main political escalator, as an easy way to achieve their goals. The Hindu followers, from the highest leader to the lowest worker, all have insisted on using this efficient tool. They hate Muslims, they hate Christians, they hate Sikhs, they hate other religious minorities, and even they hate their very own people, Dalits and Adivasis, the outcast people of India. In their imagination, millions of people living in India are enemies of Hindu Rashtra, who must be eliminated and exterminated from the sacred soil of Bharat Mata, I mean Mother India. Today, the Hindutva believers try to do the very same thing what Adolf Hitler and Mussolini did in the first half of 20th century. Because from the beginning of the 20th century, when the Hindutva concept took shape as a political dogma, they admired Adolf Hitler and Mussolini as the great leaders of their races and congratulated both of them for their acts in ethnic clearing of their countries from foreign elements, so to say Jewish and the Gypsies. So the Hindutva leaders imitated organizations like Hitler's SS and Mussolini's Black Shirts forces, and they established Rashtriya Savak Sangh, I mean the National Volunteer Organization and National Patriotic Organization, which is a Hindu supremacist paramilitary voluntary organization. As you all know, India is a very big and powerful country. And there is no doubt that India has an incredibly immense propaganda machine working perfectly. And as a result of which, you never have Indian villains in Hollywood movies, as Trevor Noah, an American showman, said during his stand-up show. This is a harsh reality, that when you try to express your concern about massive and undeniable human rights violations in occupied Jammu and Kashmir or Assam, or even in the heart of India, I mean in New Delhi, you find people play three monkeys. So to say, they take don't speak, don't see, and even don't hear position. I also get some criticism when I start to present the similarities of Hindutva goals and BJP's India today to Adolf Hitler's Nazism and his Germany. However, this fact is not depends on my prejudice. This is an incredibly horrible reality that India's far-right leaders declare openly whenever they find a little opportunity. For example, as Indians and the Western writers repeatedly put forward, Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, was responsible for and played important role in massacre of Muslims by Hindu mobs in Gujarat riots in 2002. As we see in Dexter Filkin's long report published in New Yorker as well, as he writes, after the riots, Modi's government did almost nothing to provide for the tens of thousands of Muslims forced from their homes. Aid was supplied almost entirely by volunteers. Asked about this, Modi said, relief camps are actually shield-making factories. Those who kept on multiplying the population should be taught a lesson. Dexter also adds, a few officials claimed that the decision to encourage the riots came from Modi himself. Haran Pandya, a Modi rival and cabinet minister, gave sworn testimony about the riots and also spoke to the Newsweekly Outlook. He said that on the night the unrest began, he had attended a meeting at Modi's bungalow, at which Modi ordered senior police officials to allow people to vent their frustration and not come in the way of the Hindu backlash. A police official named Sanjeev Bhatt recalled that at another meeting that night, Modi has expressed his hope that the Muslims be taught a lesson to ensure that such incidents do not recur. This is the Prime Minister of India, a former member of RSS and dreamer of Hindu Rashtra, who aims to create Hindu country without Muslims. Let me take another horrible sample from BJP leaders. I mean Yogi Adityanath, member of BJP and the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, apple of Narendra Modi's eye. During his election campaign, in his speech to a charged crowd, he said that we will take the right of vote from Indian Muslims and declare them second-class citizens. He also said masjid will be converted into Hindu temples, and instead of Muslim call to prayer azan, they will call Har Har Mahadev from the masjids. Armed Hindu gangs are openly parading in these streets. He told the charged crowd, take the Muslim women out of their graves and rape them. Incredibly unhuman declaration we see. Another example for horrific and ill mentality of RSS and BJP politicians is Rajeshwar Singh's. In his speech, he declared full of hatred against minorities in India and said that Muslims and Christians will be wiped out of India by December 31, 2021. He further said that we have decided that Islam and Christianity will be finished in India by 2021. He asserted, this is the pledge taken by my colleagues. This is our pledge. And same, Hindu Mahasabha announced the launch of its Islam-Free India campaign. Sadi Deva Thakur gave a call to declare emergency and sterilize Muslims and Christians to control their populations. Sadhij Sawarati gave the call to hang the beef eaters and attacked all secular people. I can add more and more speeches, declarations, and writings of leaders, politicians, and members of the ruling party of India, BJP, and its offspring like RSS, Hindu Mahasabha, and other far-right Hindu organizations, which should be perceived as speech of hate. So it is not a surprise after these hate speeches, whether we receive horrible news from occupied Jammu and Kashmir that after 5th August 2019, till today, more than 13,000 boys of younger ages between 13 to 15 have been taken brutally in night raids from their houses by Indian occupation forces and being sent to ever repeated jails of India. And no one knows where and how they are. More than 300 girls have been taken to the Indian Army barracks for molestation. Humiliation, torture, setting firing to homes of Kashmiris, even custody killings are a main method used by Indian occupied forces. Or we have observed lastly after poor defeat in Delhi elections of BJP, a week-long raids by government-sponsored goons of Hindu far-right organization RSS, in which they killed Muslims of Delhi mercilessly, raped Muslim girls and women, set fire on Qurans and torn mosques down. The police forces of Delhi were there sometimes as the dysfunctional witness of this massacre, and sometimes joint offender by torturing security cameras and kicking wounded Muslims by Hindu goons. Lastly, last but not least, I pray for all minorities in India, not only for Muslims, but also for Sikhs, Christians, Dalits, and Adivasis. Because if the Indian government doesn't change its policies, we cannot not expect any bright future for them and as we see in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. May Almighty Allah protect all of them. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Halil Tokar. I think you have given a very candid and very ample evidence that how closely you monitor the developments in this part of the world and how deeply committed and concerned you are for the welfare of the Muslim Ummah and also the treatment meted out to the minorities in India and also suffered by the Muslims in Indian occupied Kashmir. I think now let's move towards the Arab world, and our Arab friends are represented by a very senior and illustrious scholar who I have the honor of introducing. Mr. Kamal Helbawi was born in 1939 in Egypt. Academically, he studied as a political scientist, but for a very long period, he had a very illustrious and long-term association with the political parties there and also the Muslim Brotherhood movement. He lectured around the world and also written many books on Islam, the West, Afghanistan, and Muslim movements. He resigned from the Muslim Brotherhood in 2012. He has been since 2013 the vice president of the National Constitutional Committee of Egypt. He is deeply committed and widely traveled and extensively spoken on world peace and issues of Ummah. I think it's a great honor for me to invite Dr. Kamal Helbawi to explain and also let us understand that why Palestine is very deeply, close to the hearts of all Muslims. But when you look at Kashmiris, Dr. Helbawi, perhaps the level and the extent of tragedy is far graver and wider and deeper. The number of troops which are occupying the Kashmir under Indian occupation is perhaps twice the total size of the Israeli Defense Forces. The number of casualties is perhaps more than 100,000 people. And also the number of tragedy has no parallel. So why we don't get that much sympathy and support in view, the Kashmiri brothers and also the minorities living in India, who are millions in number, but expect some support and sympathy from the Arab world. So I'll appreciate if Dr. Kamal Helbawi can share his insight on this issue. Thank you, Dr. Saab.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. It is an honor to participate, and my salam to the panel and the respected speakers, to the moderator, and to the President of IPS, Ustaz Khalid Rahman. And here I should say a word that we worked together side by side with Professor Khurshid Ahmed in the 80s and 90s in IPS, and we learned a lot. Still, we have very good memoirs of that period. Now, the issue in our concern, I think we should be looking forward in participation to build a better future and to get out from complex challenges and different threats. Arabs in general, as part of Muslims in the world, they will never forget the events of 1947, the independence of Pakistan as a Muslim country. They will never forget the two issues that started together and is still very complicated, the issue of Palestine and the issue of Kashmir as well. Now, at present time, there are many other issues on our shoulders in the world, and this will let me say at the end of the meeting, what is our message to the world as Muslims, not only as Arabs or minorities or majorities, but our message to this world. This is one important point. I know, and everyone knows now, that there are at least 200 million Muslims in India and considered as a minority. And any province in India, the Muslims will be more than many countries in the Arab world together. So it is very important to take this into our minds. In spite of the value and in spite of the rich manpower potential Muslims have in India, including Kashmir, of course, they face numerous threatening and numerous challenges and problems. I can say clearly that the challenges, the threats are external and internal. And the problems they face mostly are local or internal, waiting for a good solution. We have listened to Lord Nazir, Ustaz Khalid Mehmood, and Professor Halil. They explained the multi-sided difficulties and the problems and the challenges facing Muslims in India especially. But still, Muslims in other areas they face, although it is not very severe like the ones upon the shoulders of Muslims in India and in Kashmir, of course. One of the occupied territories in the world now is Palestine and Kashmir. And this is very serious and a threat to the world security, the international security, to human rights, and to our existence in general. In view of the nuclear and the view of the progressive technological advances in science, Muslims in India, including Kashmir, they have a lot of professors, they have teachers, they have scientists, they have rich manpower, I can say, very rich manpower, and this will be useful not only to India, but also to the international community for their participation and for their rich history and their working for the future and peaceful message they have to the world as well. I would like to say that the wrong approach should be corrected, and the wrong claims by Indians to be dealt with properly. Muslims are not refusing progress. Muslims, minority or majority, would not refuse modernity. They will never hamper social and political progress as claimed wrongly in some circles. They do not believe in aggression. They want to get out from conflict to peace, and they respect Pakistan, and this is something they should respect everyone, but it is not accusation that they look forward to Pakistan for cooperation and for working together. And this is one of the major points to be treated between India and Pakistan, how to work together for the future instead of wars as it happened earlier. I would like to say here also one significant point, that our message is summarized, and this is more to the Indians to understand and to stop threatening minorities or claiming that Muslims are extremists and follow them and demolish their mosques and businesses and other things. The first verse I would like to mention here is وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. This is the main message of sending Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Surah Al-Anbiya. And the second message, لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ. We have to respect all religions, and we have to be respected by others as well. There is no interference from the religious point of view, and from the human rights, and from the freedom expression to respect your religion and other religions as well. Number 3, وَإِنْ جَنَحُوا لِلسَّلْمِ فَاجْنَحْ لَهَا. If they want to go to peace, so you have to go to peace. And then also another verse, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. Allah does not like aggressors. So whatever claims are against Muslims, is not one of our message or a side or a part of our message. They may be extremists in among Muslims, as among Hindus, as among Buddhists, as among Westerners, as among others. There are extremists. And the main message of good Muslims is to stop these atrocities and stop these threats and stop extremism as well. And then the last verse I have to mention, because of the short time, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى. So it is better to cooperate for good and not to cooperate for evil or terrorizing others as well. This is our message, and I would like to say that India, as a big power, it may play a bigger role in the future as a nuclear power and very rich in manpower. 200 million Muslims, the minority, the biggest and largest minority in India, and it equals at least many countries from the OIC countries, and this should invite us to benefit and get the most we can from this rich manpower. The future needs everyone, and looking for the future and building the future and peaceful future for everyone is, and creative minds instead of conflict. Going into conflict is easy, but exit from conflict will cost a lot, and involvement of conflict should not be our aim, but exit, although it is very difficult, but we have to find the means and ways to live and coexist together peacefully and build together countries, India, Pakistan, and liberate that occupied lands. I am sure that Muslims have many problems. Arabs have their own problems, but still the issue of Kashmir and the issue of minorities, especially the Indian minority, Muslim minority, is a very significant issue for Muslims everywhere and for the people in the Arab world in general. Maybe some leaders or some rulers are not up to the standard that should be, but the people support the issue of Kashmir strongly, as they support the issue of Palestine, and working for liberation and changing the terrorist minds and the colonialist minds should be our aim in future. Maybe we tend to make councils, maybe we work on teams from all aspects of life, from cultural backgrounds, to solve the problems, and not only politicians. I hope that the OIC can play a role in that, and the Arab world in specific that has good relations with India can convince the politicians and Modi and his party and other governments that will come in future that of human rights, equal human rights, and to get out of any constraints or any problems and the challenges and face the external threat together. And I said exactly our message. So India has no reason for fear from Muslims at all, and atrocities should stop as soon as we are talking now. I hope fresh thinking and the fresh attitude and the fresh approach will play in our minds and try to find that in the future. 200 million Muslims are a great source and resource, and it is a rich manpower, not only for India, but for the whole world, and the history can indicate that. Once again, I should thank the panel, and I should thank Brother Khalid Rahman, and remember with good prayers for good health and long life to Professor Khurshid Ahmed. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
For a very comprehensive and philosophical account of the situation that the Muslims are facing in Indian occupied Kashmir, and as well as India itself. And thank you for emphasizing that the issue of Kashmir is as important as the issue of Palestine, and the liberation struggle is very important, and OIC needs to play an important role, and Muslims need to work together in order to be seen as a force, but a force for peace rather than extremism. And they do not reject modernity, but also do not believe in aggression, but they want their rights, and they also want their freedom and respect. Very important emphasis, Dr. Helbawi. Now I'd like to move again to Turkey, to my dear friend, Professor Dr. Hamit Ersoy, and allow me to briefly introduce his very illustrious credentials. Dr. Ersoy is a professor of international relations at Istanbul University. He's a member of the Prime Minister's Advisory Board on Human Rights. He is Director General of OIC Broadcast Regulatory Authority Forum. He's member of the Radio Television Supreme Council, and he's also the General Coordinator of the Socrates Program at the Center for European Union Education. So it's my great honor to invite Professor Ersoy to share his perspective on the Indian past, present, and future, and how he sees the Indian reality. The floor is yours, Dr. Ersoy.
Thank you very much. Well, I would like to thank you and your institute for inviting me to be with such distinguished speakers and audience. And I would like to thank you in particular to have such a timely event organized through your webinar. And my focus on the issue actually is in particular on the status of the Muslims in non-Muslim countries in general. Instead of focusing on a specific issue, I think as an academic, I would like to share with you my thoughts on the issue in principle and in general. So before going into the details of the issue, I would like to mention a few points about the country that we are talking about, India. So India country profile is as follows when you look at the country from the Muslim world. It's a country with 80% of Hindus in the world. So that has a special importance to remember when we deal with the issue. It is the first largest, it's the largest so-called democracy in the world. Whatever the form of government is, we all know about it. As the previous speakers already mentioned, it has nothing to do with democracy, but this is how they propagate about their political system. And it is the second most populous country in the world with 1.3 population. So it has a great importance also in terms of politics, in terms of military, in terms of regional and global politics. It is the fifth largest economy with 3.2 trillion US dollar. So with this economic power, you may easily imagine how influential they can become, not only in non-Muslim world, but also in the members of the OIC in Islamic countries as well. So you can use the economic power as a political mean when it comes to the foreign policy. This is possible. And it's the seventh largest country by area. So it has so many neighbors, and three of them are crucial: Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And that's what we are going to deal with. So the country that we are talking about, India, has a very close military and economic relations with the USSR since 1965. And it is actually in the process of developing their relations with the USA since the USSR collapsed in 1990. So they are trying to have a balanced relationship with both potential superpowers, USA and Russian Federation today. So that is one point that we should remember, because it is important when you deal with them. These are the powers that they are going to act together against the Muslims within the country or against the neighboring Muslim countries. And another point that we should remember when we deal with the issue is the way they perceive the Muslims. So the Indians, or the Indian state apparatus, is perceiving the Muslims as inside and outside. So they don't approach all the Muslims in the same way. When it is their own citizens, that's a different picture. But when they deal with the Muslims outside their countries, then they would take a different approach. And that may be misleading sometimes when you have some diplomatic relations or other political relations. And another point is their approach to the Muslim countries. The way they deal with their Muslim countries in their neighborhood is different than the way they deal with the Muslim countries when they are beyond. So the neighborhood and the beyond is a different, it's a kind of different markets for them to maneuver in. So we have to consider this differentiation of the treatment when it comes to the Indian state apparatus, especially the security establishment. And one last point that I can tell you about regarding the Indian country profile is the fact that India is recently seeking to develop some kinds of special relations with Israel and the USA in order to consolidate its position against the Muslims by using this so-called Islamic terrorism or fundamentalism. This is one of the instruments which they think that can justify their inhumanly treatment of their own Muslim citizens, as well as those who are coming from the neighboring Muslim countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And that's what we are going to discuss soon when it comes to this new Citizenship Act. So perception vis-a-vis foreign policy challenges, I think, should be dealt with earlier than the general perceptions, because the moderator also mentioned and drew our attention to this crucial point. They have actually, as far as I am concerned, they have 3 layers of foreign policy challenges that reflect their perceptions about their neighborhood, about their region, and global politics. So one of their main concern is opening up to the Southeast Asia. And that's why India is trying to implement Act East policy to have an effective outreach to the Southeast Asia. And in Southeast Asia, as you all know, we have Malaysia, we have Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim country on earth. And through this Act East policy, they try to develop, improve their political relations, diplomatic relations with the regional countries, both to have a friendly relationship with them whenever they need to get their support against their either domestic or regional problems. And also they do pay great attention to this Act East policy in order to contain China as well, which is part of the second point that I would like to talk about. Regarding managing China, India is trying to revive Shinzo Abe's policy, which is quadrilateral security dialogue. The Quad, as you are familiar with in the region, was created in 2007 with the USA, Australia, and Japan with a purpose to contain the increased Chinese economic and military power, and also in order to justify this unjustifiable objective, they try to portray that they are trying to create a so-called Asian arc of democracy. This is how they do the marketing, but in reality, we all know that they are trying, together with USA, Australia, and Japan, trying to contain the Chinese threat that they think. So finally, the third layer of their perceptions about the region is managing the neighborhood policy. So India is trying to do its best to express herself about this recent insane Citizenship Amendment Act, as you are all familiar with. So they try to implement this act, which is totally discriminating against the Muslims coming from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, because the military and security establishment is ready to label any Muslim within the country as terrorist, and using this pretext of spillover of Islamic extremism into India. So this is the way how they try to justify both their domestic politics and as well as their foreign policy in the region, as well as the global politics, of course. So we have to be careful about it, and we shouldn't be deceived by this, because we all know that this act was endorsed by the BJP government in order to justify their degrading, inhumanly discriminative acts against the Muslims within their country. And regarding the general perceptions of Muslims of India, I can stimulate the following. In general, as Muslims, from outside, we can easily distinguish that there is an immense discrimination against Muslims in India in general, and Jammu Kashmir in particular. In Turkey, you will see almost every individual Muslim that in their daily prayers, they will always pray for, they will mention the name of Kashmir, just together with the Palestine and with other regional sensitive problems. And also in the Friday prayers, in the sermons, the khutbahs, you will always hear about Kashmir and Palestine at the same time. In Eid al-Adha, they will do their best to send their qurbans to the region. And there are many campaigns launched by many NGOs within the country every year. So these are the things that the citizens, the individuals, the Muslims are trying to do. But when it comes to the states, when it's come to the rulers, when it's come to the governments, that is what the actual work has to be done. And as everybody in the world is very much familiar with the fact that the president of Turkey has been doing his best to reach out every Muslim who is deprived of their fundamental rights and freedoms anywhere on the globe. There is no need to even mention this, because this is one of the reasons why we have been having so many global campaigns launched by certain international powers against Turkey. No need to name them here. And the second factor which has affected our perception of India recently was the demolishing Babari Mosque of 16th century in Ayodhya in 1992, which led BJP to power actually, which is encouraging the hate crimes against the Muslims. As when you check the reports, actually you can easily see that 67, for example, in one of the recently released report, it says that 76% of all hate crimes are committed against the Muslims. And in fact, what is even worse, 90% of those hate crimes are committed during the BJP government in recent 6 years. So this shows that how fascist, how anti-democratic, how non-democratically acting government in power in India. It's one of the clear indicators. And another point is the stratification and exclusion by caste within Hinduism, which is equally disturbing for us, both as Muslims and also as a human being. So this is the impression we have about India. When we hear the name India, when we hear Hinduism, the caste system is automatically in our mind, and we are really disturbed by it, like any civilized human being. And terrifying the religious and caste-related violence is, widespread, and every day it's on the news, and it's really inhumanly, and there is no need to even talk about it. Nobody would accept or adopt such things. Widespread poverty, both rural and urban, is very well known in Turkey. And actually in Turkish, we have a word, we say hint fakiri. And when somebody is too poor, too unable to do anything, too impotent, that's the word we use. We say, don't act like hint fakiri. So this shows the impression that every Turkish citizen is familiar with. So it's in our culture, it's part of our culture that India is associated with the poverty so well. And that's why we do really feel pity, but as I said, with the acts that are being conducted by the governments, nobody feels sympathy for it. So incorporation of untouchability into an organized system of belief is also against human rights and very much disturbing. for any civilized individual on earth again. And gender inequality, subordination of the woman in Hinduism is very well known, but not many will be talking about it because there are Muslims to deal with it. So why to bother to include them into that group of people to criticize? So that's something different. And child-related issues like child malnutrition, child abuse, child marriage, news coverages are always on Turkish media, and it's really appalling. And finally, the political issue is unresolved territorial disputes with China and Pakistan. And recently their clashes with the Chinese army is on the news and on the agenda of the international community, as you all know about it. So this coming to the status of Muslims in a non-Muslim country, this is the point that we have to deal with about it, by the way. Yes, Kashmir is the crucial problem. It's a very sensitive issue, and we are all following very much closely. But the fact is, we should find a legal status for the Muslims who live in a non-Muslim country. Otherwise, if we don't solve the problem at technical level, at legal level, at international level, we cannot overcome our local problems. For the Pakistanis, for the Southeastern Asian Muslims, it could be Kashmir. For others, it could be in Muslims in Moro, in Philippines. For others, it could be Palestine, and so on and so on. It may change from the region to region. But if we find a workable solution for the status of Muslims, how they should behave, how they should act, then we will solve permanently all kinds of similar problems. So thinking of Muslims in India, I always feel very sad about the inability of the mankind, not only the Muslims, to find a workable solution for peaceful coexistence in a globalized world. So democracy was introduced as a kind of solution to have a peaceful coexistence. Actually, it was perceived as a miraculous model of government by the humanity, especially right after the Second World War. But now, after 9/11 events, it seems that even this miraculous model of government, democracy, is a complete failure. How? We have observed through direct and indirect or representative democracy, we have seen that even presidential or parliamentarian democracy is not working properly. We have seen neither federal nor unitary democracy is not a solution to settle all the problems in a peaceful way. We have seen through liberal or authoritarian democracy that is not working properly. And finally, neither multi-party system or like USA and social democracy like Scandinavian countries, they are not providing a solution for the mankind. As you remember, the massacre taking place in Norway a few years ago. So they are not producing a proper solution for the minorities of any kind, for the marginalized segment of society, and so on. So based on this universal development, let's look at the Muslims, what they offer to the humanity. And unfortunately, we should admit that traditionalist Muslims, scholars, didn't go beyond the concepts of Darul Harb and Darul Islam. And thus, they couldn't produce any solution for how a Muslim can live as a minority in any part of the world. There is no proper Islamic answer given to this question. All what they say is to say that either turn the land where you live into the Darul Islam, or they would tell you to leave the country. to make the hijrah. But how and where, there is no answer to it. Is it possible to just migrate to any country that you like? Imagine Saudi Arabia is the land where Islam emerged, but nobody is free to go and settle there. It's impossible. So because of such practical reasons, the solution that the traditionalist Muslim scholars offer, it's not a solution at all. So let's see the facts and then build up our solution upon it. So what are the facts? Fact one, 1/3 of Muslims currently live as minority in their countries. So imagine the solution that we can find can resolve the problems of 1/3 of the Muslims today. Fact two, they live mostly under authoritarian regimes, just like India. So that makes the situation even worse, because fact three, just to be frank with you, today most of the Muslims are even unable to enjoy the basic freedoms and human rights, including the freedom of religion, as stated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Remember, Article 18 says that manifesting the religion, 1, in teaching, 2, in practicing, 3, in worshiping, and 4, in observance. How to do this? Alone or in community with others. And where you can do them in public or in private. So tell me, in how many countries the Muslims are free to teach the Islam the way they like, to practice Islam fully the way they understand, and to worship all kinds of prayers that they want, and the observance, the rituals, the ceremonies. They can do them alone, probably in some countries, but certainly in most of the countries, not in community with their fellow Muslims. And they may probably teach and practice and worship in their private life, but certainly not in public. So this is really sad. So the solution that we can come up with may be really miraculous if we can. So unfortunately, we no longer even see the Muslims enjoying such rights and freedoms in the Western democracies, let alone in other parts of the world, including, unfortunately, the Muslim countries. So, solution for all humanity. The only way out is the following in my humble capacity. Humanity is desperately in need of finding a solution for a peaceful coexistence in this post-democracy era, because democracy is over. It's not working properly, it's not functioning properly, it's just a name, it's just a concept, and it doesn't function to produce any workable solution to the minorities, to the deprived people, to the poor, to the disadvantaged people, and so on and so forth. It's an instrument used by certain actors in every country, and probably most of them are well connected to exploit it and to justify their unjustifiable objectives. And get out of this vicious circle of supremacy of any kind that we all suffer from for not decades, probably for centuries. If we as Muslim scholars do not develop a solution based on pluralism of any kind, we are bound to face a constant segregation, discrimination, suppression, and even the oppression at local, at national, and at global levels, unfortunately. So it's our duty and responsibility, both as human being and also as a Muslim, to invent a workable form of government that is applicable worldwide. Whether you are Muslim or non-Muslim, that shouldn't make any difference. And we should have a system of government, a form of government that can work in every culture, in every region. But the Muslim countries, there is one prerequisite for this, but the Muslim countries should be the first implementing this form of government before inviting other countries to do so. We cannot expect others to comply with the principles and standards of religious, cultural, and legal pluralism unless we develop and implement them ourselves. So the humble solution, together with the many contemporary scholars, the sole solution is the Medina city-state model, which covers the peaceful coexistence for all communities through the religious pluralism, cultural pluralism, and legal pluralism. When you check, when you read about how the Medina city-state was operating, you will see the essence of those basic pluralism that was working rather well and in balance. So unless we fully digest and understand that Islam doesn't expect us to force others to convert to Islam, and also Islam doesn't expect us to force the fellow Muslims to believe in the way we believe, we can never have a chance to present a model for neither Muslims nor other human beings. We will continue to wait for others to find a solution for our social, economic, and political problems we face every day. We will never contribute to the added value of any kind for humanity. We have actually, to conclude my words, we have theoretical sources like Quran and Hadith. We have the human resources available in 57 member countries of the OIC, and we have the power to do it. All what we need is the will to do it. And unfortunately, that is what we are lacking, and that's the reason why we have been suffering so far. Thank you very much for your patience, and I'm ready to take any question about any statement I made so far. Thank you.
Dr. Hamid Ersoy, I think it was a great intellectual pleasure and a very inspirational address from you. I think you've really jolted a number of Muslim scholars and experts who must be listening to you, that especially your conclusion really struck the right chords across the entire Muslim world, that the Muslim scholars and the Muslim world and the Muslim leadership cannot wait for the rest of the world to find solutions for their problems. The onus is on the Muslim scholars, the Muslim leaders, and the Muslim world to find solutions for the world and become a model in terms of society, in terms of political system, in terms of cultural system, in terms of legal system, which others can learn from based on the true principles of the state of Medina. I think on a lighter note, your president Erdogan is very lucky to have someone like yourself to advise him with such profound, original, and informed suggestions and recommendations. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is from Qatar. Professor Farhan Mujahid Chak is an associate professor and a very rising star in international academic circles. He represents Qatar University. He has taught and researched extensively on political culture. He has published a book which was published by Routledge Press on Islam and political culture of Pakistan as well. He closely follows this region and also the behavior of India in the past, present, and also has a very keen eye about the emerging trends regarding its future behavior. Unfortunately, he had medical commitment of a close family relative, so he had to rush to the hospital, but he was kind enough to record his speech for the benefit of those who have joined us today. So I'd like to play that for you. So here we are with Mr. Professor Farhan Mujahid Chak.
Assalamu alaikum. Distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to address you. I'd like to thank the Institute of Policy Studies, in particular, Mr. Khalid Rahman, a distinguished gentleman and scholar who's always tried to reach out in new and innovative ways to people all over the world to contribute to dialogue and towards out-of-the-box thinking. That's exactly what I believe in as well. Innovative and out-of-the-box thinking. I'd like to start by expressing the unique transformative moment that we exist in right now, particularly in regards to the Kashmir issue and related the perception of India throughout the world. First and foremost, that perception was largely exaggerated before, but now it's been completely tarnished. Not only have we successfully been able to uncover the realities of a brutal, unjust, and non-egalitarian racist system that was always there, but because of the hubris and the arrogance of the fanatic Hindutva government, that they've actually done a great service in themselves and helped us all along in trying to show the world that this is the reality of the face of India today. And that has done extreme wonders. Their crackdown on journalists, their threats against women, the violence against women in particular in that society, these need to be repeatedly highlighted so we can link the crimes that the Indian state and its very aggressive culture, particularly against minorities and women, should be highlighted. The crimes against children should be highlighted. The crimes, again, of course, and in Kashmir, it's a matter of rights. What needs to be constantly emphasized is that this is not a secessionist or a separatist movement. This is the language they constantly use. This is a struggle for the legitimate rights of self-determination that have been promised by the United Nations. So now, of course, all of this has been well understood. What we need to do is try new, innovative, out-of-the-box methods to approach and to further internationalize. So one of the strategies that we have been employing is now launching in multiple languages. So Turkish, Arabic, and now forthcoming Chinese. And then of course we have a long list of other initiatives, so spreading information, basic information, easy to digest pieces of information about the crimes, about the very simple matter, the denial of a people's right to self-determination in several languages in those societies and to propagate that. That is the strength of what we're going to do. Assalamu alaikum, distinguished guests.
Thank you so much, Dr. Farhan Mujahid Chak, for taking the time to share your thoughts with us, despite a very critical family medical obligation at the hospital. So I'm really grateful on behalf of IPS and the entire team and the audience that you could join us. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had a very rich, diverse, and comprehensive discourse on a very important issue today. Now it is my great pleasure and honor to invite Dr. Shireen Mazari, who is the Federal Minister for Human Rights of Pakistan. But besides that, those of you who do not know her around the world, she is a formidable political scientist of international stature. She has a PhD in political science from Columbia University. Earlier, she also studied at London School of Economics and was the chairperson of the Department of Strategic Studies, Quaid-e-Azam University. She has taught and mentored a few generations of Pakistan's strategic and military leadership. She's considered very candid and informed on world security and other issues. She has been an editor of Daily Nation and Pulse, and also headed a very prestigious sister institution, Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. We are honored to invite her to deliver the keynote address on the issue of India, past, present, and future perspectives from the Muslim world. Dr. Mazari.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, first I want to thank IPS for organizing this very timely webinar on an issue that impacts not only our region, but the world globally, especially the Muslim world. Because what we are seeing increasingly is the abuse and torture and victimization of Muslims across the world, but especially in occupied territories like Kashmir, like Palestine. And the whole international system at the same time is also undergoing changes. Since the Trump administration came into power, we are seeing a gradual approach, which is now becoming more pronounced, towards unilateralism. In other words, the decades of multilateral structures that had been built in different fields of conflict resolution, of arms control, they're all being scuttled one by one by the present US administration. So in a way, the whole world is undergoing a systemic change as well. And in that systemic change, of course, the Muslim world is also having to adjust to the new realities, adjust to a more aggressive and hostile approach that the non-Muslim world is taking towards the Islamic world. And therefore, it's very important to understand the changing relationship also that the Muslim countries have with India. Because if we recall, after 1947, while some Muslim countries immediately developed a close affinity to Pakistan, like Turkey, had close ties to India and were not very comfortable with the creation of Pakistan. I recall, for example, Egypt, when it was under the monarchy, their King Farouk saying, it seems as if Islam has been discovered in 1947. So there was a general hostility towards Pakistan, and that hostility was further aggravated when Pakistan willy-nilly, in my view, and I think wrongly so, joined the US military alliances of CENTO and SEATO. That immediately disturbed Pakistan's relations with Egypt, with Iraq, and a number of other countries. And I'm talking only of the Muslim world. It also made our relationship with China and with Russia much more difficult, and it took a long time to overcome those differences. So Pakistan did not start off by having extremely close ties with all the Muslim countries at the time. We were lucky we had a close relationship with Iran at the time. Our relationship with Turkey actually has a long history, and there is an affinity between the two peoples that transcends politics. as we can recall the Khilafat movement that started when the Indian Muslims sent money to Turkey, even though by then Turkey was undergoing its own revolution and under Ataturk. Nevertheless, this relationship that was carved out at the time between Indian Muslims and the Turkish people stood us in good stead and was built upon after the creation of Pakistan. In fact, just to mention in passing, the Ish Bank in Turkey was actually created with the money that was sent by the Indian Muslims to Turkey during the Khilafat movement, which started in British India. Also, of course, with Iran, we had a very good strategic partnership. Iran was a monarchy at the time, was very much, of course, in the US sphere of influence. But for us, it was extremely critical because with a hostile India on our borders, our western border was not disturbed by a hostile state. So the Iran-Pakistan strategic relationship at the time was equally important. Also, luckily in those early days, we had a good relationship with the Indonesian leadership at the time. And Indonesia is one of the largest Muslim states, as we know. With Malaysia also, we had a very close affinity, especially since the Malaysian rulers' children used to study in HSN College in Pakistan. So there were these ties that we developed very early on, which stood us in good stead. Pakistan also, by its own pro-activism, became one of the leaders in supporting Muslim causes. We supported the Palestinian cause, and we have continued to support that cause even during the time when the PLO leadership in the form of Yasser Arafat was very close to India because of the non-aligned movement, and I'll talk about that in a while. We also, of course, were in the forefront of helping the nationalist struggles for independence in Tunisia and in Algeria. The Tunisian leader Bourguiba, Algerian leaders like Farhat Abbas, all worked or all traveled on Pakistani passports, and the Pakistani embassy in Paris was a link between the fighters, the nationalist fighters in the homeland of Algeria and in Tunisia, and of course their links to the French government and the communications and so on. Then of course, Pakistan, regardless of what the relationship was at a bilateral level between different Arab countries, stood by the Arab world in its wars against Israel. And in the 73 war, Pakistani pilots took leave to go and fight for Jordan and for Syria. And our fighters shot down Israeli aircraft during that war. So there was a principled position we took on supporting Muslim causes, on supporting Muslim states when they were attacked by Israel, and of course, in principle, supporting the Palestinians' right to their homeland. And that was, of course, also linked to our position on Kashmir, the right of the Kashmiris to self-determination. So that principle that we supported the Palestinian state on was reflected our principled position on the Kashmir issue as well. Now, of course, coming to Kashmir, for us, that has been a central factor in not only defining our relationship with India, but in defining our relationship with the Muslim world. How do Muslim countries, what is the position that Muslim countries take on Kashmir? That to a large extent helps define how we interact with them. Now, there are some countries, even after the revolution in Iran, for example, we find Iran has taken one of the strongest positions on Kashmir presently. Turkey has taken, is another state that has taken one of the strongest positions. Unfortunately, we find in our Arab allies, the position on Kashmir has not been clear, very vociferously stated in support of Pakistan. That is a dilemma that we need to overcome. We also realize over a period of time, our relationship with Indonesia has not remained at the level that it was in the early years. And one of the causes why a number of Muslim countries have developed close relations with India is because the economic factor. Let's be very clear, there are strong economic interests that define interstate relations. And therefore, it creates issues for Pakistan when it seeks support from Arab countries and other Muslim countries against India and in support of the Kashmiri people and their struggle for self-determination. For example, the most recent election of India to the UN Security Council sadly got a huge amount of votes from the OIC members. In fact, the OIC in many ways has been very disappointing. We have interacted with the OIC on the Kashmir issue. There was a Islamic countries foreign ministers group that was formed on Kashmir, but substantively in concrete terms, we have not been able to muster the support which we should have gotten on principle on the issue of Kashmir. And why am I saying on principle? Because the dynamics have altered on Kashmir, and that requires the international community to review how it views India. When I talk about dynamics, I'm talking about what this Hindutva supremacist Modi government did on 5th August, and that is recorded very well. It illegally annexed Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. In other words, it wanted to try and change the legal status of Kashmir as a disputed territory, which is recognized under UN Security Council resolutions. Now, this act itself is a war crime under the 4th Geneva Convention, because you cannot change the status of an occupied territory. So just on that, we should have expected, and we did expect, Muslim countries at least and the OIC to rally behind Pakistan and condemn India for committing what was effectively a war crime. Sadly, the statements coming from different Muslim countries, apart from Iran and Turkey and Malaysia, were not very encouraging. OIC itself dithered on the issue, and to date, there is a bit of a confusion over what the OIC's position exactly is on the new changed dynamics of the Kashmir dispute in view of what this fascist Modi government is doing. Because of this, we have found also that in the UN Human Rights Council, we were not able to get the sort of support we should have gotten for bringing about a discussion on the human rights violations in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, despite the fact that the UN Human Rights Commissioner's Office, High Commissioner's Office, has published 2 Kashmir reports, clearly demanding that the UN Human Rights Council set up an investigation commission to go and investigate human rights violations in Kashmir, especially in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So this relationship, because the dynamics have altered in what India is doing post 5 August, therefore, there should have been a change in the view that a number of the Muslim countries view their relationship with India. What is now happening finally is not because of what India has done in occupied Kashmir or what India is doing to the Muslims in India itself, because they've been conducting a campaign to basically make Muslims of India stateless by the changes they've made in their Citizenship Act. What has changed the dynamics finally, in especially the Arab world, is Indian government claiming to or stating that the COVID pandemic in India spread because of Muslims. That has finally awakened Muslim civil societies, Arab civil societies, and the pressure on their governments has become much more to condemn India for its abuses of Muslims in occupied Kashmir and in India itself. And we see for the first time very vocal statements coming on social media from Arab civil society. And we are also seeing, as a result, more vocal condemnations of India's treatment of Muslims coming from the Arab states themselves. But there is still a long way to go. On the part of Pakistan, I think Pakistan has had a principled position on supporting Muslim causes and Muslim states, regardless of how they interact with us. For example, we have stood steadfast on flatly refusing to have any sort of overture with the Zionist state, with Israel, including flatly refusing, and rightly so, recognition of Israel, even though many Muslim countries have recognized Israel. And we are also seeing other Muslim countries making overtures towards Israel. But Pakistan's position has always been, and has been reiterated very recently by our foreign minister, that there is no question of Pakistan recognizing Israel till there is a Palestinian state, according to the UN resolutions dealing with the two-state solution. So Pakistan has continued to maintain its principled position, but the time has come for the rest of the Muslim world also to stand up and be counted. Are they going to allow abuse of Muslims as long as it doesn't happen in their territories? Are they going to allow Muslims in occupied territories to be brutalized, to have the status of these internationally recognized occupied territories altered unilaterally and illegally by states like India and Israel? Or is the Muslim world finally going to actually come together and be recognized as the Muslim Ummah, speak with one voice in support of Muslims and Muslim human rights wherever they are, and to condemn abuses and victimization of Muslims wherever they may be? It is not a matter of national interest for these Muslim countries. We also have to have Ummah interest in the forefront. If we say there is such a thing as an Islamic world and a Muslim Ummah, if we believe in that, then let us put that belief to a practical action, to put it to practical action, or let us then not talk about the existence of a Muslim Ummah, because so far disunity unfortunately defines it much more than unity. But speaking again, let me conclude on this, speaking again for Pakistan, Pakistan will not waver. We never wavered even when we had lost half our country due to Indian machinations. We will not waver in our support for Kashmir, in our support for Palestine, and we will continue to do what we have to do to ensure that Kashmiris get their right of self-determination. We expect other Muslim countries to support us as we support them, but whether we go it alone or go it with the Ummah, our commitment is a principled commitment for the Kashmiris and for the Palestinians, both of whom are suffering fascist governments, and both of whom are being subjugated the most violent abuses in complete contravention of international laws and UN Security Council resolutions. We will not let that continue to happen. Our fight will continue at all levels. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mazari, for a very comprehensive and articulate expose of Pakistan's perspective and principled stance, not just on human rights, but also Pakistan's perspective on how India is viewed, how its past, present, and future is understood in Pakistan. Thank you so much for a very insightful and candid and comprehensive keynote address. Ladies and gentlemen, we have had a very rich and diverse discourse on a very important contemporary issue because India is drawing a lot of attention, not just in this region, but around the world. And today, this event by Institute of Policy Studies was an effort. And let me tell you, this is one of the first such initiatives. You will witness a number of such events in future in which we bring together different perspectives from around the world, from some of the leading, most knowledgeable and influential voices whose voice matter, who have a great insight on how India and this part of the world is understood in the world. And we have a lot of questions from around the world. My colleagues have shared a very extensive list spanning perhaps 4 continents, which obviously, because of the limited time, will be not possible for us to do justice, because this list will take perhaps 1 hour to address these questions, even if we try briefly. But this must not dishearten our viewers, and it reflects their great interest, support in this debate, and that they have contributed. All these questions have been noticed, and they will be addressed together in the concluding remarks of the session chair, the Executive President of Institute of Policy Studies, Mr. Khalid Rahman. But before I invite him to deliver his concluding address, here are a few takeaways for the viewers who have been very patiently listening for the last almost 2 hours and 18 minutes and have joined us. Ladies and gentlemen, what have we learned and what has come out after this rich discourse in which 8 different speakers spoke from different parts of the world? Number 1, the Muslim Ummah is increasingly concerned and sensitive to the exploitation and atrocities that they have been facing from different world powers in different parts of the world. But nowhere this is more rampant, more deep, more grave than in Indian occupied Kashmir in particular, but also an Indian entire polity where all the minorities, but Muslims in particular, have been on the receiving end of exploitation, persecution, humiliation, and marginalization. Today, you heard from around the world that the Muslim Ummah is concerned, and they view India with deep concern that this behavior is not adequate or appropriate for a state that aspires to be a world power. It has weakened India internally. It has destabilized the society. It has raised grave security concerns in the neighborhood, which all of you are cognizant of, whether it's the India-Pakistan border, whether it's the line of control between Pakistan and also the Azad Kashmir and the Indian occupied Kashmir, or whether it is the line of actual control between China and India, whether it is Nepal and India, or whether it was Sri Lanka, which was also invaded by Indian military in the 80s. Bangladesh is an evidence that how through direct intervention and direct support for insurgency, India divided Pakistan, and something that the current leadership takes pride in. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have learned that the domestic ideological trends in Indian politics has destabilized India. It has alarmed the world. It has destabilized the region. and the world sees this trend with a lot of concern and as a possible threat to world peace and security. It is very important, and I must emphasize the recent OIC contact group meeting, which also reiterated this concern on behalf of all the Muslim countries, that India needs to restrain and review its behavior, both internally towards the Muslim minorities, in particular towards the Kashmiris, which it is holding as a hostage in Indian occupied Kashmir, but also review its behavior towards the region, and if it wants to be seen as a peaceful and stable country in the world. But most importantly, the things which were stressed was by all speakers that it's about time. The world order is changing. It is undergoing transformation. It poses challenges, but it also offers opportunities. Therefore, it's about time the Muslims stop to depend on the Western imperialist powers and also recover from their colonial mindset and stand up for themselves, unite themselves, have a common shared voice on all issues, including Palestine, including Kashmir, in all international multilateral forums. Only then their voice will matter, their concern will be heard, and then their collective weight and influence will have a leverage on the world capitals where it matters. So with these few words, I have the great honor of inviting the Executive President of Institute of Policy Studies, Mr. Khalid Rahman, to deliver the concluding address. Khalid sir.
Thank you very much, Syed Muhammad Ali. And I shall also like to thank all the speakers for their time and for their very valuable input on this very important subject. As has been indicated earlier, this is not the first time IPS is focusing on this particular subject. It has been in our major areas of research, and for the last 2 years, we are continuously organizing international seminars and conferences on this subject. Today, we have started, in fact, a series of such programs of webinar. And while we had a certain number of speakers today, we shall, inshallah, also be holding a program on 26th of this month, 26th of June, which will be second of the series. Realizing that when we are talking about the Muslim world response, we need to have representation from various parts of the world, not only from the Muslim majority countries, but from the countries where Muslims are not in majority. And thus we try to understand how people are thinking and come to points where we can organize this intellectual discourse in such a way that it leads to some actions. Now, coming to the subject of today's webinar, Indian past, present, and the future perceptions of the Muslim world. I would like to make some 10 or plus observations based on what I have listened during last 2.5 hours, and also on my understanding of the subject. Let me first put things in a little longer and deeper perspective. It has to be realized that India as a unit, as it is today, was not existed before 1947. Now, I'm not referring to only the partition, but I am trying to emphasize that at that time, 40% of the total subcontinent area was being governed as princely states. These, we know, were states with native rulers who had entered into treaty relations with Britain. The rest, about 60% area of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, were provinces and territories which were directly under British administration. This is, however, a different subject, but this is one of the key points that we should keep in mind whenever we are discussing India and the Muslims there. Now, related to this point is that presence of Muslims in India is almost as old as the religion is. Historically, if all the territories which were existing at the time of advent of Islam and are now part of today's India are taken together as one region, we have to recognize that the arrival of a companion of the Prophet Muhammad, Malik bin Dinar, is well established in this region. We also find a mosque built during the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in 629 AD in a town which is situated in the state of Kerala today. This mosque still exists and is said to be built by the same companion when he was here with his 13 colleagues. This followed trips by Muslim merchants and their caravans as a continuous process in later years. As was the pattern in those days, Muslim merchants' interaction led to spread of Islam in the local population. Now, it gives evidence to two facts. One, Islam came to India long before any rulers, or if you call them invaders, came. Two, the entry was smooth and Muslims enjoyed support of the locals irrespective of their religions being different. My next point is, and which is very well known, I'm not going into details, that Muslims ruled India for 600 years, which is, when we say Muslims ruled India for 600 years, as a kind of government which was ruling the whole area as one unit. But during all these days, next point which I would like to highlight, that Muslims made a huge contribution to life and living in India. To what extent these Muslim rulers were genuinely interested in providing an Islamic governance could be debated. And there are natural ups and downs in view of different approaches and personalities of different kings. Nevertheless, there is little difference in recognizing that these were by and large the periods of progress and development, and of course, good governance. Contribution to art, literature, culture, and architecture during all these years in India is a rich part of global Muslims' history. Another important observation when we look at the past of India is that during the Muslim rule, there was no coercion to change religion. While a sizable number of locals became Muslim, the majority of population continued to adhere to their original religion. Why? It could be called lack of interest on the part of Muslim rulers, negligence, or a fault on their part, or a combination of all. Or as is sometimes called, Muslim rulers were often more interested in conquest than conversion. In any way, there wasn't coercion at any notable scale. Otherwise, 600 years should have been enough to wipe out a community following a particular ideology. Linked it to that, my next point is that there were no communal violence. Violence on communal grounds, as we see it today in India, was not present during the Muslim era. in spite of very obvious religious differences, there prevailed a communal harmony, and one doesn't find communal clashes based on religious differences during the Muslim rule. In fact, the communal differences leading to violence was the gift of the British rulers who, for their vested interests, followed the divide and rule policy. Next point is that Muslims of India were in the forefront in the independence movement, and therefore they also became a major target of the British rulers, mainly because the British had taken over the government from the Muslims, and Muslims were more aggressive in the freedom struggle. As pointed out earlier, the seeds of communal violence sowed during these years led to culminate in the large-scale clashes at the time of independence of India and Pakistan, and continuing even today. Coming to the present-day India, the fact is that India is the world's largest Hindu country. But notably, it may also become the largest Muslim country in future. While a vast majority of the world's Hindus, which is around 90% plus, live in India, it also has the second largest group of Muslims within a single country. Now, it can be third largest. The population figures continue to change with each passing day, but currently, as far as the Indian records are concerned, it is around 200 million. And same is the population of Pakistan. So it could be debated that whether it is second largest or third largest after Indonesia. But the fact is that it has a huge Muslim population. The projections are there that by 2050, Muslim population in India will grow to more than 310 million. Now, it is not only in absolute numbers that it will be increasing, but as far as the percentage of Muslims in India is concerned, presently it is around 14%, and at that time in 2050, it will be around 18%. So this would make it the largest Muslim population in the world if the current scenario continues. Now, an important observation is regarding the secularism in India and how did it impact Muslims. Apparently, secularism should have been favorable for Muslims, yet it didn't. Why? India, in my view, opted for secularism for three key reasons. First is the historical perspective. Because during the independence movement, Muslim League was doing its struggle in the name of Islam and for the sake of Muslims. And the most popular slogan in those days was, Pakistan ka matlab kya, la ilaha illallah. So it was obvious that Congress, which wanted to keep the country one and knew that there is a large number of Muslims, they could not have raised the slogan that we are going to make India a Hindu state. So this was a compulsion for them. And secondly, the internal divisions within India. I mean, there are ethnic problems, there are caste problems, there are so many other problems that they could not have solved if they would have declared themselves as a country with a particular religion. And third, there was an international dimension in these ages of so-called liberalism and so many isms are there. They thought that it would be useful for them to have an international face, as has been pointed out by so many speakers today, that for the global audience, they have declared them as secular, and they try to market themselves as a country with secularism. So secularism was not by choice, but it was for particular interests to be confirmed. And this is also confirmed when we look at the last 70 years. A greater part of these 70 years has been ruled by Congress, which calls itself as secular, and has been ruling major part of this whole period. What we find that so many steps may not be taken as apparently as against Muslims by the Congress, but it was the whole period during which we find that it has created an environment where it had become conducive for the RSS and its political affiliates to grow. Now, when we look at the whole issue of Babari Mosque, it was locked very early after the independence, and Congress was ruling. It was demolished in 1992 when Congress was ruling. And throughout these years, the courts of India, and I think rightly mentioned by some of these speakers, the courts of India were not able to come to a just-based solution. And now it has been solved during the BJP government, again, not on the basis of justice, but on the basis of their majority bias. Similarly, we see that the social, political, and economic suppression of Muslims during all these years of so-called secular-based government and the constitution. There are several reports which have documented all those suppression and all those figures which tell us that why Muslims have not been able to find a reasonable place in the Indian polity. Take, for example, the case of Indian Parliament. Now, we know that today it is, the Muslim population is 14% plus, which requires that there should be a certain number of Muslims in the Indian Parliament if we keep that ratio in mind. But at the moment, there are only 27%, which comes around 4%. And it is, last time it was 22, and the peak was sometimes in 1980s when it was 49. So from that point, even at that time, it was not matching the ratio of the Muslim population in India. But since that 49 figure, it is continuously going down. So riots and clashes on communal grounds remain very frequent, wherein most of the victims belong to the minority Muslim community. Political, as I said earlier, political, social, and economic suppression. Very recently, during last 1 or 2 years, a Pew Research Organization has come up with a study which has measured different countries and ranked different countries in terms of their policies about the religious minorities, religion and religious minorities. Now, this study involves 195 countries of the world, and it establishes that Indians experience high levels of government restrictions on religion. So they have developed an index which is called GRI, Government Restrictions on Religion. And the study is not based on a single year. In fact, it has documented things from 2007 to 2017. 10 years figures are there. And based on that, they have said it. Of course, there are many other countries which have a very bad situation, but India ranks among the highest. Even more significantly, when it comes to religion-related social hostilities index, that is another index that has been developed on in this particular study called SHI. India emerges at the top in 195 countries of the world during last 10 years. The same Pew study also concludes that while communal tensions between Indians of various religious faiths and castes have long plagued Indian society, most Indians do not recognize it as a major issue in the list of national issues, which they feel as a matter of concern. It is endorsed only by 37% of the respondents and comes at 13 number as a national issue in their survey. My next point is that BJP, as I just said, as against the Congress, has only exposed the so-called secularism. Now, Congress was very clearly having a two-phase policy, but BJP, in fact, has made a contribution for many people in the world to know what exactly India or Indian politics is. Their manifesto and claims made earlier in the recent election campaign are very clear. So whether it is NRC, the National Register of Citizens, or scrap of Article 370, or passage of the NCA, the National Citizenship Act, or rebuilding Ram Temple in place of Babari Mosque, all was included in their manifesto. During their campaign, they have been vocal about making India Muslim Mukt, and which means Muslim free. They have promised to eliminate Muslim personal law and widespread conversions of Muslims into Hinduism by force or voluntary, and to establish detention centers for those Muslims who are not ready to accept their agenda, 6 of which are already in place in Assam. Of course, they have not been named like this, but when you go to those detention camps, you will find a large majority belongs to Muslims. They are seeking to change the constitution. Currently, they are not in a position to change it because they have 2/3 majority in the parliament, but not in the upper house, Rajya Sabha, and they also need a 2/3 control in the provinces. So, but they have promised, they are making it again very loud and clear that we are interested in changing the constitution. And you must have noticed a lot of statements in this regard. One of those say that 2024 will be the last election on current lines, meaning thereby that by that time they will be able to change the constitution. This is a statement by Amit Shah. So coming to the future, what will happen to Muslims in this overall scenario? I believe Muslims in India will continue to be the target by BJP and, of course, its allies. And there are several reasons, but to name a few, I would say that it is basically an RSS and Hindutva agenda. Hatred against Muslims is a built-in part of their philosophy and psyche, and is now a matter of survival, because if they withdraw, they will lose the political ground. In view of past and expected political gains in the absence of good performance, the hatred against Muslims is also a political strategy. Increasing population of Muslims, which is expected to reach, as I earlier said, 310 million by 2050, and its international character. Now, let us recall that India is the, if you include Nepal, there are 2 Hindu majority countries, and India, of course, has 94% of the world Hindu. So as compared to that, there are 57 Muslim countries, and thus Muslim and Islam has an international character in that sense. So that is perceived as a threat to India. And of course, weak international response until now, including from the Muslim world, as we discussed it today, and declared and undeclared support from the Islamophobia global forces that is available to a party like BJP and its affiliates. So looking at the Indian Muslims' response, I feel there have been a lot of sacrifices, but much to be desired as a focused, sustainable, and comprehensive campaign. And currently, I believe, during last 70 years also, there has been lack of unity, lack of alliances, lack of outreach, research, and documentation. Looking in this overall perspective, while Muslims are being asked to leave their religion and become Hindu, or leave their country, or leave their place and live in the detention camps, or least is to permanently live as a lesser human being, I think it is a challenge for Muslims, but at the same time, it is a challenge for India also. A country where so many people are being pushed to wall cannot sustain itself. 200 million people, as some of the speakers said, is a great human resource, and it needs to be positively involved in progress and development. By keeping it pushing towards the wall would only create reactions, and we have seen so many examples in recent past in the world. As far as the global response, I indicated it earlier, this has been very weak, but has started emerging and continue. Until now, it has continued to be hostage to political, economic, and other vested interests. And this is going to be a genuine challenge in the coming days also. But the good thing is, as has been mentioned here, that there have been popular Muslim feelings, and the government's action, though, do not match at the moment. But of course, if the popular Muslim action is really organized, we can find some hope that the governments will have to follow their people in the longer terms. And some of the indications that have been mentioned during the discussion, that civil society within the Muslim world, and of course also outside, media is also attending the issue. Social media is now a new source, and the parliaments and the governments have also started taking note. So what to do? I think there have been several ideas during the discussion, and I should start from the point that our moderator had raised, from the question that our moderator has raised in the beginning. Is the situation in India is a challenge, a threat, or an opportunity? I believe it's all three. A lot, however, would depend on as to how we read it and how we address it. While it is criminal to remain silent against repression or tyranny, it is sometimes natural to be reactive, but we need to be proactive in our approach. I think this has been emphasized again and again in today's discussion. And particularly Dr. Ersoy listed a number of areas. And we need to think what and how Muslims can contribute towards global development. So that will give the Muslims an image, and they can genuinely contribute towards the difficult times that in many parts Muslims are facing. Most importantly, I think Dr. Ersoy referred to provide a contemporary model on the lines of Medina, and Dr. Farhan stressed on innovative and out-of-box thinking. So all these ideas need to be focused. But how can we really make it an opportunity and make the lives of the Muslims easier? I think the message of the 3 hours discussion was that we need to increase awareness, education, information, engagement, and lobbying. So this is not confined to only the Western countries. In fact, we need to have a global strategy to increase awareness, education, information, engagement, and lobbying. And we need to have coalition buildings. We need to have more people involved in this whole challenge and addressing this challenge. And of course, this, when I say coalition, this also means coalition with the non-Muslims who are genuinely interested in providing human rights to all people. And it requires a movement within India also among the Muslims to be united, to form alliances with different groups in India. So with all this in view, if I look at the questions that we have received during the whole session, it's a long list. And as discussed earlier, we do not have enough time to respond to each and every question. But one of the message that was conveyed in different questions was to put economic pressure on India by having some kind of a boycott of Indian products, and of course, creating an environment where the trade and investment is affected. I think this is an extremely important area. And unfortunately, we have not been able to think in those terms, or at least to act in those terms. The idea is not new. But my feeling is that most of the time, these kind of ideas and slogans get aborted because of lack of genuine homework. So it has to be very patient, very long-term exercise. It has to be a very well thought out exercise. And instead of just calling in journal that we should boycott India, the homework would require Indian products and India as a trade partner. We need to focus on specifics. Now, you sometimes, if you try to have a kind of journal boycott and journal campaign, it doesn't lead to anything. But if there is enough homework and we target the sensitive products, keeping in view the volume, keeping in view the importance and significance in their trade and economy, and then target certain areas, and then it is a campaign that is going to be a long-lasting campaign. Of course, it will make an attempt. It will be a success in the overall scenario. There are a couple of more questions which can be taken, but I would like to invite all of you again to 26th June seminar, where we shall keep these questions in mind and will certainly give floor to different speakers to take up those questions. With this, I once again thank all of you for giving your time and giving your input to this important subject. Of course, IPS organizing team also deserves compliments for their hard work in organizing this very important webinar. Thank you very much.
And this concludes this webinar. Thank you to all the panelists, all those who joined us. Thank you so much. This webinar is concluded now. Thank you.